Hi, this is Brian with The Balanced Dog, and out here with me today is Reese, and we're doing a little recall work with her. She's a very insecure, very flight-driven dog, and so recall is extremely critical for a dog like this. And as I've said in the past, recall I feel is the most important command that we can teach our dogs. Place is probably my second most important. At any rate, what prompted this video is that one day I had two clients who I've been doing one-on-one remote collar work with, and then the next day I had another client that came in and they were both having recall issues. Hey Reese, come here. Reese, down. See, recall, very important. It's ruining the shot. But at any rate, so the key was, it was trying to figure out why these clients were having issues with recall. So the first client, when he showed up, we were kind of talking, and he's got a very sensitive pit bull, but he's a very strong personality. He was a lieutenant in the Israeli army. He works as an ER nurse. So he says, that's just his presence that he always brings. But my point was, as I said, well, you would treat a frightened child that came into the ER completely different than you would treat the construction worker who has a nail in his knee or something. And he says, oh yeah, absolutely. So we needed to kind of teach him how to incorporate that with the dog that he was working with, who was actually a very sensitive dog. Now, we were doing remote collar work with all of these dogs, and so what was most important was, it wasn't about increasing the e-collar pressure to get the dog to recall in. Reese, come here, down. To get the dog to recall. It wasn't about increasing the collar pressure. We actually put the remote away. It was more about figuring out what was going on the handler side, because that in the end is the most important tool, is the handler / owner, right? And so with him, it was everything he said to the dog sounded like a correction, even though he was giving the dog a sit, a place, or a cue to come in. It all was very, sit, place. And so the dog would go into this sort of defense drive to some degree. And so why would you expect a dog to come to something like that? The other client was more frustrated, and this dog again was a very sensitive dog. And so again, it was more about, okay, put the e-collar away. It's not about turning up the e-collar to get the dog to recall. There's definitely a disconnect. And again, that was an issue of frustration. And so the dog would be jumping on her, nipping at her, grabbing the leash. But once I took the leash, the dog settled and just connected with me right away. So I could tell that that's not an e-collar issue. That's a connection issue, right? And so then we started doing a lot of leash work and getting her to understand what her body language represented to the dog and how the dog was interpreting that, and also getting her frustration under control. The third client was basically the dog. He was just allowing the dog. He wasn't aware of what the dog was doing, coming in and sitting at his feet. The dog coming up and sitting on the couch and leaning into him, laying on him. This dog was just basically taking advantage of him. So again, why would that dog want to come in to a person where that dog has complete control of everything? So again, it wasn't about like turn up the e-collar, make that dog come in under high amounts of pressure. That was not the resolve. And so like with Reese, she's very sensitive, and yet I've already worked with the clients once to teach them, how to read her body language, how to move towards her, versus, or actually more importantly, having her come into us. So if you go into her, a lot of times she goes into a very high level of defense, which I did a video on that, a short one a while back of her in her kennel. So, I always say it doesn't matter if you're using a clicker, if you're using a pinch collar, if you're using a remote collar, and there seems to be something that's falling apart, through the course of the training. Because I've had dogs that were really well trained in obedience. They had really solid obedience. But then there was still a disconnect when the owners were handling them. When I was handling them, it was different. So I think that's something to look at when it comes to tools. Whatever you're using, the client / handler is the most important tool. And so that's when I get an issue where the dog is still being X, Y, or Z. I'm not going to troubleshoot that over the phone by saying, well, you need to turn up the collar higher. It's like, nope, come on down, let me watch you work the dog. Majority of the times, the owners have gone back to a bad habit. So if their dog has been reactive, they had an issue once or twice when they've gone home where maybe their timing was off and the dog got reactive a couple times. Now, as they're walking, they start going into that habit where they're taking the leash and they're wrapping it around the hand like, oh my God, here comes a dog. That's already sending information down to the dog that it should be concerned about what's coming ahead, right? And so again, that's about adjusting the handler and their body language and what they're signaling to the dog. So just a really good observation. So when it happened with me with 3 clients in 2 days, I was like, well, this is a good subject matter to go over. And it always makes me aware too, don't get stuck on trying to say, well, you're just not using that tool properly, or you don't have your collar level up high enough. There's a time and a place to increase the collar levels. But when something like that is happening, where the dogs aren't recalling, and that's the one thing we work on a lot, then I have to stop to look at the most important tool, which is going to be that handler or that owner. So we're going to go off and start doing some more recall with Miss Reese. It looks like she wore herself out during the process of shooting this video, but we're going to get her moving. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.